that tonight's meeting is available for the public to attend virtually, is being streamed and recorded. Can I get a motion, please, to adopt the agenda? Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Gerwin. All those in favor? Carried. Petitions, delegations. Ministry of Forest, Lands, Natural Resource Operations, and Rural Development, Old Growth Strategic Review, Ministerial Reorganization, and Peak Renewables. So we have with us tonight, Greg Vandola and Carrie Lynn Vance. I think you all know our council members, Councillor Gerwin, Councillor Andrews, Councillor Penny, and on the screen we have Councillor Roper. And of course, you're all familiar with Scott Barry, our CEO, and our corporate manager, Ms. McIver, and our deputy CAO, Mrs. Laval. So I'll let you begin.
Well, thanks first inviting us to tonight's meeting. We appreciate the opportunity to speak with you today, this afternoon. So maybe what I could do is just provide a quick overview of the process around Old Forest, and then that type of thing. And maybe I could have a bit of an understanding how much time I have here this evening, just so we do get to a chance to ask and answer some questions.
So we have about 45 minutes is what we've slotted for tonight.
Okay. I'll try to be brief, and then if I'm too brief, I'm sure you'll let me go from there. So as you're probably well aware, the Old Forest process that started provincially was identified by our current government, and they selected or identified 5 individuals to actually review old forest across the province and develop some criteria around that in terms of how we might consider protecting those areas in a different way than the current standard we've been utilizing over the past number of decades in terms of how we've been doing old forest. And a lot of that aspect is the basis of around that it was being inconsistently applied provincially in terms of how old forest was being considered. And a good example of that is here in the Northeast region, where we have 3 different timber supply areas: Fort Nelson, Fort St. John, and Dawson Creek timber supply areas, and they're all managing their old forest differently. And so in that respect, it makes it somewhat challenging to really ascertain what's being protected, how you're protecting it, because the question is always, it isn't consistent when you're being asked, and the response isn't consistent. So that was part of the conversation that started provincially, is that we are looking for a different aspect of how to manage old forest. A report was developed by 2 individuals that identified the need for this, and recommendations were 14 recommendations that came out of that report. And so the panel then took the painstaking aspect of having to go through and review vegetation resource inventory. In other words, the inventory that is consistent across the province that virtually identifies all the different old forest age categories beyond old forest, so everything that we have in a lot of respects. So and so they reviewed that, and they came out with a significant amount of old forest that they wanted protected. Initially, it was around 7.6 million hectares. And at that point in time, the province wasn't necessarily comfortable with that number, and recognized that it needed to be reduced to a smaller subset of that because of the economic impact that it potentially would create. And so out of that, 2.6 million hectares was actually identified as in 3 different categories: old, rare, and ancient. And the criteria for that, difference between an old and ancient is just a difference in age. Rare was the identification around a rare ecosystem versus it just being old. It was also old, and it was within a rare ecosystem that needed protection. And so then the process then began that the province then identified to First Nations across the province that they would be provided a certain amount of time. Initially, it was 30 days to identify the polygons of the 2.6 million hectares across the province, that they would have that 30-day period to respond which ones were an imminent threat and which ones they would wish to have protected. Well, I'm sure all of you are aware that 30 days was not enough time, and First Nations has taken far more time, and we're still working on that within the Northeast region. But we do have different First Nations that have identified areas, and specifically within this TSA, which encompasses, the area that you're concerned about. Fort Nelson First Nations has been very outspoken and indicated they're not interested in identifying old those polygons, but recognize that some of those polygons are being recognized regardless within the current boreal caribou plan that was developed and that type of thing. So there's consistencies there. So and that's the same thing I would suggest across the Northeast region is we haven't got a positive response back that any of the First Nation communities are interested yet of identifying those polygons as being protected. However, we're going through the Yahi decision. We're negotiating with Blueberry, we're negotiating with Treaty 8 around protected areas across the entire Northeast region. And a lot of some of those polygons will be incorporated within those protections, but not necessarily based on, just because they wanted those areas, but they're also significant areas or spiritual areas that the First Nation communities are interested in. And so at this point in time, we're still working with First Nations. My staff we've got interacts with First Nations across the Northeast region, and is currently working with them and identifying those polygons, but they're also part of those negotiations with Treaty 8 and Blueberry as such. And so, that's virtually where we are today. So I don't know that I have anything else to provide you other than it's still an ongoing situation that I'm not, that we haven't really seen. And I don't see that there's going to be any significantly different impact than maybe what you've already been provided around the boreal caribou plan that's been, I'm suspecting that's been provided to you at some point in time.
Does anyone have any questions for Mr. Dola? So I think, from our point of view, we are on the edge here of having perhaps a pellet plant located. And we believe that this is just the beginning of utilizing our forest industry to revitalize the economy of the Northern Rockies. So naturally, anything that reduces the amount of fiber in our area has a negative effect on that goal. And that's problematic for us. It's nice to hear that the First Nations have not, decided to take larger amounts of the forest base and reserve them in the old growth way, because we do think that the restrictions because of caribou are sufficient in our region. But that, of course, is our goal, is to revitalize the forest industry, and so we want to make sure that we don't start setting aside so much land that we foreclose some of these other companies or some of these other potential participants from coming to our region.
So probably the only thing I would respond in that would be, one of the nations that we are continually working with right now, which does reach into the Fort Nelson district in a lot of respects, is Prophet River First Nations. And we're still working with Prophet River. They haven't necessarily indicated about the aspects around for one, they have very, very few polygons that were actually, or polygons are just the area, right? And that type of thing. But they within their traditional territory, there are very few in there. But we are also having additional conversations with them around caribou, recognizing that, you know, they're a transboundary almost. They also have interest in the Fort St. John TSA and the Fort Nelson. So we're working with them on the boreal caribou in the Chinchaga area. And so there will be some additional aspects of that. So I think at some point in time, it might be worthwhile for this council to get another update from you know, the district and from Kerry Land in terms of, you know, once we get further down in terms of what was finally protected and how that came to be. So I think that might be something of interest at a later time.
Thank you. And we have Mrs. Vance and I have talked about and been at the table with some of the discussions around the blueberry negotiations and the Treaty 8 in general. Ms. Vance, did you have something to add?
I with Greg, I think it would be good to come back for another conversation because there are 14 recommendations with respect to old growth that the technical advisory panel brought forward. And so we're in the initial stage. I think we're in working through recommendation 6, which was focused on immediate deferrals that we work collaboratively with nations for those areas at high risk based on that categorization that Greg brought forward. So I think having another conversation around some of those other pieces would be helpful. And it's really, as Greg said, trying to not only consistency, but build this new approach. So we want to take respect to managing old, but managing the forest sector broadly. And so I think there's an opportunity for further discussion with respect to this.
We would be glad to have you come back anytime to give us an update on that. Any other questions? Councillor Gerwin.
So I think we all know that the office here is in for a bit of a restructuring. And so we're wondering how that restructuring, like possible restructuring that has a reduction of staff, how that will impact our ability to ensure that we are engaged with people that know our area, that, you know, there's a huge concern here that things are being moved, and this is out of the Fort St. John office and this is out of the Dawson Creek office. And so who locally, like, we're worried that we are going to lose our ability to engage with local players.
So I think I'd really like to stress the fact that of the significant importance of having a Fort Nelson office and the staff and having that office here. It's, you know, we need this office here from the standpoint that not only does it support, you know, the aspect of a local understanding or district understanding of the you know, the land base, but also there's a significant amount of interest that we also consider with the guide outfitter, you know, the different guide outfitters, so that, you know, and different ones that are throughout. You know, I would like to have a crystal ball right in front of me today to be able to indicate what the final decisions are that are coming out next week about what the reorganization looks like. But I know that our regional management team, which Kerry Lynn leads, is committed to ensuring that this office not only you know, becomes continues to be resourced, but also that we are going to try to have a district manager in this office again, and that type of thing. And you know, with the potential of having additional opportunities here around the peak renewables and that type of thing, we're already in the process of trying to manage some training for staff that may not be here necessarily right now, but we're really hopeful that we, you know, if in fact we get to that place in time when we need tenure staff to be able to put out new permits and that type of thing, that they are actually residing in this office. That'll be that's definitely going to be our priority and our focus. And that may take some time for transition though. We need to be able to get people, wanting to come here and that type of thing. And we're definitely committed to that aspect. And, and so, I'm not sure I can add much more than that. Maybe Carrie Lynn can, but that's been our focus is to, maintain an office here, try to fill it with staff that are here. But we need to, I think this council to recognize that it'll probably take a bit of time in transition for that to happen. And there'll be work that is going to be done out of the Peace District until we have that opportunity that, at that time. And when, say, for example, if Peak does arrive here and all of a sudden needs the permits that it needs.
Mrs. Vance?
Thanks, Greg. Maybe a few pieces to add around some of the background for this. So this is definitely not a downsizing approach that this government has taken. So this ministry was established 2010, 2011. And it was really about integration. So it was really trying to look at how are we going to work together, be more integrated on how we manage the land base. So the concept of the one land manager, et cetera. And so there was, this review, I've never gone through something like this as a civil servant. I've gone through a few reorgs. Normally it's just a decision and then we figure it out later, but this has really been thoughtful. It's been a very thoughtful process to understand the things that were really positive and are really positive about this ministry and the things that are tricky. And certainly the really positive things that stood out, regional presence is something that's really important. And that's shown to be both from Indigenous people and from industry, that it's really important to have a regional presence, and the regional model of regional operations is powerful and important. The integration is really, really important, that we want to make sure that however we move forward, the integration is there. The recognition, resource, and the lack of resources that we've had, that's a significant recognition that the mandate of this ministry is significant, it's large, and that we've struggled to resource that. Also recognize when you're this big of a ministry, sometimes it's difficult to get things done because you're this big. And so those things were really part of that conversation. It's been a very thoughtful process. So it isn't about downsizing. I don't know, as Greg said, none of us are aware of exactly what this is going to look like, but the regional presence is important. This is not about downsizing. This is about how do we leverage all of those really positive things that made this ministry effective and hopefully address the things that were trickies and that we challenged with. It's unlikely that any organizational design is going to fix everything, but it's been very thoughtful to try to do those things. So I just wanted to share that there's some really positive components of this, but as Greg said, it is going to take a little bit of time. It's going to be a little bit of time for us to figure out what this looks like, to fill positions, all of those kinds of things. But I just wanted to say that some of those pieces, such as a regional presence and maintaining district offices, including Fort Nelson, is really, really important.
Thank you. Are there any other questions on this? Very well, hearing none, we'll move on to Peak Renewables. Is there any update you can give us on Peak Renewables?
Maybe I'll ask Carrie Lynn to start, and then you can provide a bit of an update on Peak to begin, and I'll fill in this time.
I don't have a lot to give in terms of an update. My understanding, Mike Hickaway, our current acting assistant deputy minister, has been in ongoing conversations with Peak. We've been meeting quite frequently. That there's certainly been a lot of forward progress. The rail is still a tricky. I don't think that's been an ongoing tricky that we've had all the way along. But at least from our perspective, there isn't any challenges with respect to tenure allocation, volume, or those kinds of things from our perspective. But it is part of a larger component that Peak is working through. But that's about all the update that I can give with respect to that. We still continue to meet regularly with Peak. We still try to find solutions to some of their challenges, but it sounds like positive progress with respect to tenure and tenure allocation, but still that the rail is still a tricky.
Mr. Dola.
And so maybe what I'd add is that, from an operational basis, Peak is actually has a couple of cutting permits in the Trutch area and working with Profit and working within the community forest. And I think that's really positive to begin with. And so although their presence may not be felt as broadly or as widely here in Fort Nelson, we definitely recognize that, there's a significant interest there. And so that, I think it's going to take a bit of time till we get the full impact or the full statement on when that will occur. And I honestly believe that the province is doing everything it can to try to make sure that, that a forest industry, reinitiates itself in this district, which would be a positive thing for both the Fort Nelson community and Fort Nelson First Nations community broadly. So I think that would be well received.
Thank you. I spoke to Peak Renewables this afternoon regarding CN Rail. They had a meeting with CN on February 9th. And Mr. Nicolishan said that the meeting with CN was very, in his words, very, very good. And they discussed some of their arrangements they're looking at, and CN is going away and asked Mr. Nicolishan and Peak Renewables to give them a couple of weeks here to crunch some numbers and come back to them. But he is very optimistic that they're going to reach some kind of an agreement soon. I pressed him on when Peak Renewables might make a final investment decision, and he didn't bite. He wasn't going to commit to that. But anyway, it is moving along. He has said the same thing that you're saying, that there are no issues. There are very minor issues with the forestry, the fiber part of this, that most of that has been solved, and the only issues that are remaining are small minor issues. The rail is their primary concern, and that is moving along very well. And I'm hoping that shortly we'll hear something positive. The clock is always running on this, and we want to make sure that Peak Renewables is up and running, hopefully for next winter with a logging program, and that means that they have to hurry and get this mill up and built and everything else, and that's going to be a challenge. And every day that goes by is a day that's wasted. The community could use this economic development, so we're anxious for that. Very anxious. Any other questions? Any other comments? Mr. Dola?
So the only comment I'd make, I think just so council understands the realistic timelines, if they start to build the mills, one thing, it'll take, the community forest becomes a really important aspect initially for Peak, because it's going to take at least probably the better part of a year or so for them to get through the planning cycle to actually have permits, within the district and that type of thing. So, we don't turn permits on just, there's a whole bunch of planning regulations they have to work through. So what I would suggest though is we're here to really support that transition period, but the community forest will play a very important role initially to get them up and running when you're ready for permits, because they have a management plan and they have the different kind of planning aspects. And I'm not sure that I haven't said that to you, but I'm hoping that you've heard that story before.
Yes. Ms. Vance, any comments?
Not too much additional. Agree in the community forest. That's pretty significant. We also know that Fort Nelson First Nation obviously is very interested and is playing a role as a partner. So I think that's very positive progress on all of those in terms of what the future looks like for this particular region. So very positive about that. We continue, as Greg said, to provide training and keep staff engaged in work. And that's really important so that we're ready when the opportunity arises, and we want to be able to be responsive and be able to work through the processes. So it's great work that everyone has done. It took a while to get to the community forest, but that was a really powerful piece of work that everyone was involved in, and the partnership there it serves as a really good foundation for what's to come.
Thank you. Are there any more questions for Mrs. Vance or Mr. Dola? Any final thoughts? Very well. We're going to give you back 20 minutes of this meeting. Happy Valentine's Day, Mrs. Vance.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you making the trip.
No problem at all. Coming up for the weekend.
Teriyaki stir fry, don't forget. Oh, Mr. Fletcher's in the hallway. Mr. Berry.
Yeah, you got a little glad you didn't for that one.
Welcome, Sergeant Fletcher. To speak, just cue your mic there and the little red light will come on and you'll be audible. So I think first off, congratulations are in order on your new addition.
Yeah, thank you very much. It was it's a busy household now. I thought it was busy before, but we're at 3 kids now, so it's something. Everybody's healthy.
Mr. Fletcher, I think you know everyone here on the screen is Councillor Roper, you know Councillor Penny, Councillor Gerwing, Councillor Andrews, myself, and you know our CAO and Deputy CAO and our corporate manager, Ms. McIver. So welcome.
So I received the email just about I guess it was back in November. Yeah, it would have been November. Just with some concerns that came to council in regards to property crime and mischief, vandalism, that kind of thing. So I've compiled some statistics from 2021 just with our files, and I can talk to you guys a little bit about where we're trying to go this year with that to try to remedy some of the problems that we're seeing. So overall, though, it's worthwhile to mention 2021, we were actually down 100 files than the previous year. So last year, the detachment here did 3,067 files, investigations, down from 3,162. So almost 100 on the nose there. And I mean, that could be many different things, 100 files. Although it is significant in a town this size, it doesn't speak just to one aspect. Part of that, though, would be the focus in 2021 and our continued focus into this year on targeting some of our prolific offenders who are generating those calls for service, and not necessarily, it's not necessarily the type of calls, it's the quantity and the impact it's having on the community that, lands them on our radar. So to talk about, just back to the letter that was received from November, just about our mischief files, we did see an increase overall in the detachment area on mischief. Mischief being, I'm careful. I like to be careful with this one because a lot of this comes down to Stats Canada scoring as well. So it's good to interpret it. So I had to dig it down a little bit. Mischief under 5,000, generally we're talking vandalism, that kind of thing. But it can also be, mischief can also be, impeding the lawful enjoyment of a dwelling house, which is completely different than what we're talking about as far as property damage. So to really boil it down to answer the question, so we had 136 incidents or investigations of mischief last year. Only 4 of those were related to commercial businesses in town. Now, I'm not including apartments and that because that falls under dwelling house, but we're talking individual businesses. Overall, though, we did forward 10 charges of mischief last year. Break and enter, though, into businesses, we did see a number of 26 reports last year. And I'm going to get into that a little bit, about where we're at with that. Where we run into some of the issues with the break and enters, and it's not, there is sometimes a reluctance from the property owner or whoever is representing the property to proceed with charges. So not in every incident, but there's a large majority, and I don't want to undermine that person's thought process and why they don't want to. We're a small town and people have a multitude of reasons, which is acceptable. But in order for us to be successful in charging somebody and putting this to Crown Council, we need statements. We need statements from, whether it's the employee or whoever was working, whatever the case is. And that's where we sometimes hit a little bit of a roadblock, but it's understandable. It's not, a lot of our break and enters, we could probably share names around this room. We're in a small town, but it is a small group of people that are committing these offenses who are on our radar. We're doing what we can within, within the confines of the law as far as what is admissible evidence and trying to, put these files towards the Crown to try to see some result. And that's where there's sometimes a disconnect, is we may have a file that is good to go, but where we fall short is the complainant or the witnesses don't want to cooperate for certain reasons. And that's where we kind of run in. We can't go with it. And we have to, we have to respect that as well. People have the right to make a decision on how they want to proceed with something. Sometimes there's businesses that know who it is and they're okay with just banning the person from there or having a conversation with them and remedying it outside the criminal justice system, which is completely, I respect that. But we do need to, sometimes we are putting a little bit of pressure on witnesses to understand our side of and the global picture as well. That this person just isn't affecting you, they're affecting, what we are going to be doing going into the new year, one of our new members, he's a recruit that's here, and when our recruits come out from Depot in Regina, they have to complete a community project. And this was one of the projects we brought up, and he is taking lead on. He is going to be working on a business loss prevention information, I would say, package that he is going to physically go out and meet with different businesses in town and provide this information. And it's just about loss prevention strategies. Some companies and small businesses don't actually have a loss prevention strategy where you'd see in a bigger franchise. And then talking about what we as the police require and help us be successful in prosecuting if that's the way we want to go. And everything down to, little tips about video surveillance, making sure video surveillance is working, making sure you know how to access it. That's another big thing. And believe me, I've seen some systems that I wouldn't even get into to pull the video, but little things like that we're going to try to be proactive with that, work with our businesses in town. And if that happens, where we do have a break enter, a theft, or some sort of incident, we're a little ahead of the curve there to try to collect that evidence. So we are, as I mentioned before, just with identifying prolific offenders. So we I touched base about prolific offenders, and prolific, it's the draw of resources on not just the RCMP, but usually these individuals are drawing resources from everywhere. And they are the people that we need to focus on. And it's not necessarily always criminal charges, but maybe it's about linking to services, Northern Health, or, we talk about a lot of our property crime is fueled by drugs. Let's be honest here. People generally don't steal something because they just want it. They are stealing it to sell, to flip, to get drugs. And, if we can link those people and have them stop using drugs or come up with a strategy that may also mitigate and lower some of our property crime incidents. It's a challenge. There's no magic answer to this. And I mean, one part I was going to talk about here, which kind of segues into it, is about just about the drug use and kind of the vision the province wants, that necessarily we may see some success or some challenges ahead of us. As we understand the courts and the Crown, when we're talking drug possession, a lot of the time it's not deemed to be in the public interest to pursue charges for drug possession. Now we can debate, that, but that's out of my hands. That's out of any drug offenses fall under the Public Prosecution Service of Canada, so it's not even within the province. It's federal Crown that deals with that. So there is some issues there, and a lot of it, we run into is sometimes what works in the bigger center like Vancouver, drug possession charge in the downtown Vancouver east side, is a drop in the bucket compared to maybe some of the issues we're seeing in a small town here. It impacts people differently. And where we've seen some success though is when we do forward charges, and I'm not talking about drug possession because that's just generally off the table for Crown, unless there's other mitigating circumstances. Trafficking and sale is still high. We try to paint a picture though to the Crown that's getting the Crown prosecutor that's getting the file, just to understand the community. And that may be something we're going to reach out to the town at a later date to maybe come up with a sort of a standardized victim impact statement about how drug activities affects the town. And sometimes that helps coming from an independent mayor and council, you know, this is the hardships we're seeing in our community, and this is why, you know, this is important. But that's something we can talk about down the road and come up with something that's meaningful. There is I don't know if you guys are aware, the provincial government and the public health officer have requested to the federal government an exemption under the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. It was in the news briefly. And the reason why I'm bringing this up is because as a police in town and our service providers, if this goes ahead, we're really going to need to work together on trying to come up with some strategies here. The proposal is, and it's online on the provincial government, but in a nutshell, the province wants an exemption that any person in British Columbia could have 4.5 grams of any drug legally. We're talking meth, crack, cocaine, and that, you know, if it is, this was back in November where this was forwarded off to the federal government. There hasn't been a response. So as of right now, the status quo under the Controlled Drugs and Substance Act. But this is their, this is coming from them. The BC Association of Chiefs of Police, they did write a response back. We are, you know, the chiefs of police are for British Columbia are supportive of, you know, measures that can work towards the opioid crisis we're seeing in the overdoses. But we don't necessarily support this is the way to go. The problem that we're seeing, and I mean, their stuff is published as well about their response. There's a lot of concerns, especially with the, you know, there is no provincial legislation in effect for public use like we see with you know, alcohol and cannabis, you know, prohibiting its use in public places. So they have said they are open to having a planning committee to look at that, but this hasn't been seen, obviously in Canada. And the concern is, and this was brought up by the BC Chiefs of Police, are we putting the cart before the horse a little bit here? Does our healthcare system and the services that are in place right now have the capacity to deal with the potential increase in drug use? And I would suggest, you know, especially, you know, we see it's difficult in towns this size, in the services that are being provided by Northern Health, and you know, and I don't want to be misquoted here. The people that are here and working with our addicted individuals, they are doing the best they can, and you know, hats off to them. They you know, but they need help, and you know, as a, you know, I worry about those agencies as well. But as we, as I said, we haven't heard a response back from the federal government. I don't know how that's going to go, but I think it is something that, you know, we should look at either a planning committee. I know we do have our addictions. There was an addictions group, service provider group meeting. I think we really need to pick up on that and be prepared that that could be coming down the pipe. I don't have any direction as far as, I know what the RCMP's response is, and they're also including the chief of police. Our deputy commissioner met with us and expressed what their concerns that they brought up, and I can forward that on to you guys if you want. But at the end of the day, I mean, these are government bodies that, you know, are moving this forward, and then we're going to have to try to figure out how to navigate it, and hopefully, you know, at the end of the day, we hope to see some success somehow. So that, I can forward that off to you if you haven't read that article and the proposal as it is. And then also there was a mention, and this is just backtracking. Sorry, you're gonna type all over the place because of me. Just about community presence. That was the second part of the letter from the businesses. We are in a good position right now, staffing wise. We went through a little bit of a hiccup there. We have 2 new members that have arrived in September, and they should be getting their training wheels off hopefully soon, and that will help out on our scheduling. And yeah, there is as we move forward into our performance plan for the next fiscal year, that is one of our big pushes for property crime and just overall offenses in town is to more community presence, foot patrols through town, that kind of thing, checking in with businesses, not necessarily even just during the day, but in the evenings as well. And then as I said, with this information that we're handing out for loss prevention strategies, and that should hopefully also increase networking with our communities, with our community partners or like our businesses in town, information sharing. You know, maybe they picked up something on surveillance that that overnight that they really didn't think much of, but maybe is valuable to us. So that is a plan.
Any questions for Sergeant Fletcher? Councillor Penny.
Mentioning there about increasing presence around the community, would that involve 24-hour coverage then?
No, I would love it. I don't have the staff. We don't have the authorized strength of attachment to run 24-hour police. And that's from, I mean, our staffing levels are set from the province now that it's a provincial contract detachment. But the way we are doing our scheduling right now, we're not 24-hour, but we do have on call, but we're also now, we do have a little bit of flexibility and in stretching out some of the shifts to cover off areas that would usually be no policing coverage.
Yeah, so like even, you know, maybe if switch shifts around, so we coverage through the, you know, the dark hours of that 3 to 5 a.m. type of thing, and maybe
Absolutely.
members get the afternoon off, you know,
So
type thing.
the other thing we've done as well is I've tried to, we're still waiting to hear back, but applying for some funding under provincial targeting enforcement program. It's a provincial program that we can apply for funding for overtime and that kind of thing, even bringing resources up. And it's specific to some of our targets. So I'm hoping that we can use that resources wisely and see some successes. But we are trying our best to do what we can with the resources we have. It's a struggle.
I totally relate to that. Like I said, it's just that, I don't know what to call it, dark
It's-
hours, witching hours,
I'll
whatever.
call
I
it
mean,
witching hours.
yeah.
There's
3 to 5
you're all
a.m.
walking around at 4 a.m. probably up to no good, or
Pretty much.
Um,
So like I said, if members could be home in the afternoon and
Yeah.
give us coverage on that. Just one other quick thing. You mentioned 100 less files than previous year. I just wonder how many files would normally be generated when the bars are open. Because that's one thing that's been closed for a year, right? So
Yeah. You know what? I think that's a good point as well. I don't know. You'd probably have to go back like 2019.
we have to go to 19 for
2018,
sure. Yeah.
and start seeing what the impact of that is. I mean, I think that would result in a decline, but it's kind of an interesting situation where a lot of these COVID restrictions and whatnot, we've talked about this previously, we've seen an increase in some calls related to domestic violence and substance abuse. So is one outpacing the other? I'm not too sure. It'd be interesting to see. And that may come out when Stats Canada does up its reporting to us about crime trends in the province, and then specifically breaking down by area. It'd be interesting.
Just because the numbers, I have difficulty with it, with the amount of constituents that have come to me with having issues, which makes me wonder then, are they not going to? Because I mean, it's one thing if they're having issues and they're coming to complain about these issues, but they're not going to the police about it, then that's an issue because we can't track it, or we can
We
never do
can't.
anything. And we're here to communicate with you to let known what the problems are out there. And I'm being bombarded weekly. I'm being at my business. I have several people at least every week that are coming in and complaining about the amount of either vandalism or theft or attempted theft or this sort of thing that's been going on, and which caused obviously for us to reach out. And if the numbers are not reflecting that, I'd like to try to find out why. Is it just that these people are not
Yeah,
reporting it, right? So
and they may not be, and for a multitude of different reasons. I mean, they may have reported in the past and didn't see success out of that investigation and don't feel that it's worth calling in again. But I wouldn't encourage that. You know, there's a lot of different variables that can, with an investigation. Sometimes we're successful, sometimes we're not. Property crime's hard, especially when it happens when nobody's around and no video surveillance. I did one thing worth mentioning. We just increased one more members trained here with property crime examination. So fingerprinting and that kind of expertise. We just had somebody finish that course and come back. So we have 3 people here now that can do that kind of forensic, low-level forensic stuff at a crime scene. If there is a time though, you know, when you have people talking to you, you know, try to encourage them to come talk with us. If they don't want to come down to the detachment, I'll come down to your shop and meet with them too. I mean, that's not a big deal. And try to come up with, because information that we don't know is not information we can act on.
this is exactly my point. So I'm going to be a little bit more diligent from now on when they are in, that I'm going to get this information down and either, you know, forward it off to you or give you a call, because I don't want to complain to you that you're not doing your job because of constituents telling me that you're not, to find out that they're not doing their part and reporting it. That's basically it. But so
If-
yeah, working
Even
together.
if they don't want to necessarily come talk to us, but they're okay with you passing the information along, that's helpful.
Yeah, I really appreciate that.
Any other questions? Councillor Gerwin.
Thanks. Victim services, is that position still filled, working well?
Okay. Yes. So victim services. We did have a victim services worker here. She resigned quite quickly for some personal reasons and moved out of town. We have filled it. It was posted. We filled it. The individual problem we're running into, she is here. She is working, but she's not security cleared yet. The reason for that is our security clearance process out of Vancouver is backlogged, and it may take up to a year to get them security cleared. Oh yeah, I have a public service position at our detachment that has been sitting vacant. We have selected the person, and it's been over a year now, waiting for the security clearance to come through. And we're seeing this across the RCMP right now. And the problem we're running into is we have applicants in some of our, not necessarily here, but in other units that are getting hired on and pending a security clearance, and then they end up losing interest for obvious reasons and get a different job somewhere else. And then you start the vicious cycle again. I have no say. What we're trying to do with her, we have no issue with her obtaining security clearance, but because of a security clearance, if you don't have one, we can't share certain information. That's the law. But we are going to be using her in proactive public victim services role. So working with our community partners, stuff that she doesn't need a security clearance for. Now, she's also connected with Fort St. John Victim Services, who can do the tasks that require somebody with security. So when we talk about domestic violence and that kind of thing, say reading the operational file about what happened. She can't do that yet, but victim services worker in Fort St. John can. And then we're hoping we can use her in a, however we can, to help support those victims without having to have access to those files. It's a juggling act. I've never had to do it before, to be honest with you. Usually security clearances came out pretty quick. But in incidences where, like, let's say we need her at the hospital or trauma, we can bring her up if the victim's okay with that. You know, obviously, you know, we want that victim cooperation and, you know, and go from there. We're going to use her to the best we can, and then hopefully we can get the security clearance through. Paperwork's been sent in. I mean, it's sitting there. So.
Is there anything that we can do? Like, can we write a letter? Can we
I wish
you
shout
could from the rooftops? Can we bring this issue to light? Can we add pressure? Like,
my bosses all the way up to the deputy commissioners recognize this, and it's what it's coming down to is they're having their own resourcing issues, and a lot of that had to do with COVID and people working from home and reduced staff, and now there's a significant backlog and they're working through it. We ran into issues here with security clearances, even with our guarding. You know, we had applicants, they were suitable applicants, and it took, I think the latest guard we had, it took them over a year to get a security clearance through. And there's no, you know, not because there was issues, it was just somebody opening the file. We've seen a significant increase on my overtime budget just to cover guarding. I had to bring police officers in to guard in cells, which we generally don't. It's contracted through the commissioner service. What happens when an individual here gets remanded or detained by the courts, and the sheriffs aren't able to transport them to Prince George until the following week, and they're with us for 6-7 days in our cells, 24 hours. All of a sudden, that cost goes up. I mean, that's obviously going back to the province, but then when we talk about, it's not, you know, we covered those shifts because we had to, but that takes away now from, you know, potentially being on the street. I've had to take on shift members. You know, if I have 3 members working, 4 members working, now one has to, and we have no choice in that when the courts order us to hold somebody. It is something that I've brought up to our senior management team of the Prince George, who understand fully that issue. And even at that level, we weren't able to get any security clearances rushed. So
I just wonder if as council, we would want to maybe look at bringing this up to the NCLGA to see if how it's affecting all of the other local governments.
You know what, I would be.
I'm not that
very
rep, but I
supportive
think
of that.
Councillor Roper is the rep now, but I think that they have a policy for emerging issues. So maybe we want to write a letter. Do you need a resolution? I could make a motion to write to the NCLGA to look into security clearances for the RCMP auxiliary staff. Would that be the right
It would
wording?
be contract staff and
how
public
it's
service.
impacting our community and if it's impacting other communities as well.
Perhaps we could get staff to write that letter in conjunction with Sergeant Fletcher here, and then bring it back to council for us to have a look at, so that it captures what you're saying, Councillor Gerwin.
I'd second the motion.
Thank you.
Moved by Councillor Gerwin, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
So Sergeant Fletcher, I'm one of those ones who've been the victim of probably 8 break-ins in the last year, and probably reported maybe 3 of them. The problem is that you're right, not much happens when the constable shows up. He looks around and he sees what's happened, but there's no evidence, and it takes time to report this, wait for the police, have the police show up, And you know what the outcome of this is already going to be, is that there's not going to be any evidence there. I'm rather interested in the fact that you've got somebody here who's got some qualifications in ident, and maybe in a proactive way, we can look at some of these things about how we can be proactive. Councillor Penny brought up the fact that it's not 24 hours coverage in Fort Nelson. I did have a tenant who had heard some vandalism going on in the laundry room, phoned the RCMP, said that they had heard loud music in the laundry room, and then Prince George said, this is not sufficient to call a member. In the end, it was $2,000 damage to a laundry machine. And this has gone on quite a bit. So the losses are probably approaching $10,000. Not one incident, but several incidents. Sure. And still not enough to warrant, these are not losses where you can claim against your insurance because the deductible is sufficiently high. So it is a huge problem for myself. And I hear, like Councillor Penny hears, from many people who have been the victim of vandalism. And as a matter of fact, lately, some people who are like manning hotels late at night, very concerned about people, who come in and they are worried about their safety, and there are no RCMP members on patrol at the time. So these are concerns where there's not just theft, vandalism, there's genuine fear in the community about, for instance, if you have to go to the office late at night, a lot of employees, particularly female employees, don't want to go there late at night because they are afraid. They see people hanging around who shouldn't be hanging around at hours that they shouldn't be hanging around. And they know that there is no RCMP on patrol at that time. So these are some of the concerns that I hear. When you were talking about drugs and the BC government moving to decriminalize the possession of drugs, and I understand, some of the ideas with decriminalizing this so that you're not utilizing a lot of police time for very little effect. But when I was talking to the former leader of the Liberal Party, he's a doctor and he's a lawyer, and there's a lot of people around that table who are very educated. And, they talked a lot about, getting these people help when they are addicted to drugs. My feeling, though, is that, probably over 80% of these people who are addicted to drugs don't want your help. They want your wallet. And they're not interested in rehab. And some of the people around that table seem to be from neighborhoods and growing up in communities where they have a certain mindset that is not reflected in some of the people who are addicted to drugs. And they believe that if you would help these people get rid of their addiction, you could turn them into, productive members of society. And it's been my experience that that just simply isn't true. It's true for maybe a certain demographic of society, but it's not true for every demographic. And we see the same offenders again and again and again. And you know that the chance of rehabilitating some of these people is as close to zero as you can get. One of the concerns people have when I talk to them is the light sentences that are given to people for doing crimes, and how the police arrest somebody for vandalism or theft. And they go in, they charge them, they turn them back out on the street. Before they go into their first court hearing, they've already committed 3 more crimes. And you know as well as I do that you don't catch every crime. You might catch 1 in 5. When they go into court, the judges don't give them very stiff sentence. And, for one reason or another, and I suppose from a judge's point of view, what is the point of giving somebody 6 months in jail? The judge knows he's not going to be rehabilitated either. So what do you do with them? So I sympathize with you and the many problems there are with this, but I also hear from good law-abiding, tax-paying citizens that they don't want to be victimized all the time. And I know I'm not telling you anything new, and I hear this from your officers all the time. They get it, they understand it, but it seems like a lot of people there and they don't know what to do about the problem. And
Yeah,
sometimes I
agree.
see the government doing things that I don't think are particularly going to be effective. So that's my rant for today. Councillor Penny.
Go back to one other, you just brought up there about the BC government talking about dropping any possession charges for whatever it is, 4.5 grams of whatever drug. Statement you made earlier, you know, the effects of that, say on East Hastings, if you want to send every officer down there and pick up everybody that has drugs in the pocket, I could see how you're tangled up, but yeah, exactly, right? But I mean, in a small town here, how much could it help? It may, if we were to catch somebody early, the first time they had that in their pocket, you just so happen to pick them up and you actually see that there's a result, something could happen. I'd actually be interested to hear what other small communities have to say about this rule as well. So
That's a great point. I mean, those are also avenues with individuals like that may be as their first time offense or restorative justice and those kind of things, or there may be a great candidate for it. But you know, we need that framework and that in place, you know, that they committed an offense and that they, you know, there's some consequences for their behavior. You know, I agree, you know, whether it's a charge or, you know, I'm a big advocate for restorative justice, especially with people who are, it's not always first time offenders, but sometimes it just kind of breaks the cycle where they got to sit down and face people that they've wronged. You know, it's, but you're right. You know, are we missing that point? And in a small town like this, that there's enough people here that are gonna, especially somebody like a young fella in town that's making some poor choices. There's enough people in this town that are gonna go to the way to tell him you need to smarten up, right? Because you know that his parents, his grandparents, but that's valuable, right? You know, there is, it's something I comment on, my wife comments on, the sense, the sense of community here, right? Like everybody looks out for each other. It's a pretty tight knit community. We've been all over the province. I tell you, it's raising a young family here. We're happy we're here. And then, you're gonna have to drag me out, and or my wife. I mean, she's pretty. I think she's really well roots. So, but that's something that's a positive for a community our size, that we may have. The province is going to do what the province is going to do with what they believe is right, but we may have opportunities here to come up with some homegrown solutions on how we're going to mitigate some of that. And that's why, as I mentioned previously, just about a working group, back to, we're talking about addictions and we're talking about, it all falls hand in hand with property crime, falls hand in hand with, I think, you work with the drug level, you're going to see positives in your other areas that we're seeing offenses. We can be absolutely honest here. Our criminal element here in Fort Nelson is not a large population, right? It's manageable if we come at it as a group. It's not one person or one agency is going to have the solution, but collectively we may see some successes. If you see one success out of 10 failures, that's great. I think it'd be a 10% reduction in crime. So.
But just to finish my thought here on that. So this is legislation that you say has not been brought into place yet. It's something that they're looking into, right?
So it's an application. So they've made an application to the federal government, to the Ministry of Health and whatever the province has. So the Ministry of Mental Health and Addictions has made an application to, what are they calling themselves now, the federal government? Federal Minister of Mental Health and Addictions and Federal Minister of Health. They're asking for an exemption under this Controlled Drugs and Substances Act. Now, Section 56 sub 1, and I'll give you a little legal here, but of the CDSA allows for exemptions to be from the federal government. Those were designed for safe injection sites that we see in Vancouver,
Mhm.
where the federal government has given that, you know, whether that's that building or that company or whoever's managing it, permission to be exempt under the CDSA for people to use drugs safely there. Okay. There in the province is asking for an exemption under that section for the whole province, where it'd be legal to use. And there's parameters set in place for like the safe injection sites. You know, somebody can't walk in there with, you know, pounds and pounds and selling in there. It's meant for an addict to go in, and, you know, sure, fair enough, right? Those are people that are trying to, it's a disaster on the Vancouver east side. There's a lot of tragedy down there, and they're trying their best. You know, but we don't have that facilities here to accommodate that. We don't have, you know, are we opening ourselves up? Is this the big thing? You know, we saw a transition with the legalization of cannabis. That was pretty, or I would say legalization, decriminalization. There's actually more laws now associated around marijuana than there was before with the province, and those laws didn't exist, but a framework came on, and there's kind of rules of engagement there. And you know, it's not acceptable to sit inside the rec center and smoke pot, you know, while you're watching your kids play hockey, but it, you know, it is acceptable if you're at your house or wherever, which is fair. You know, so the concern is that that framework has never been proposed yet, and we don't know what that's going to look like. You know, for the other aspects of it.
So to just drag back again, I'd be interested to draft a letter to the NCLGA, just making for sure to let everybody aware and wonder what kind of impacts they'd see in their small communities from this exemption. It sounds pretty scary to me.
I would second that motion. And also, I don't know when their next board meeting is, but the mayor and Councillor Roper would be doing a report, bringing up any concerns or activities that happen in the NRM.
Mhm.
So they could certainly bring that forward to the NCLGA board too. But there is a motion. I did second it. We could, in one letter, we could deal with both issues, right?
Mhm.
Of all those in favor, please. Moved by Councillor Penny, seconded by Councillor Gilling. Carried unanimously.
I appreciate the fact that you brought this up.
What I will do is I will forward to Scott the link to the proposal, and then also the BC Chief of Police response as well. It was pretty well written, and kind of outlines our concerns as well, just to kind of give you guys a picture when you're drafting a letter. And that's a great idea.
Such a slippery slope. You do that. That's fair for me anyway. As soon as they see that a little bit is legal, then
It is.
Councillor Gerwin.
So you've mentioned a working group a couple of times. So I'm assuming that you are thinking that the NRM would be involved in the
Absolutely.
working group. So I don't want to just walk away from this meeting without would the next steps be towards the formation or participation in that working group?
Yeah, and you know, I think we need to include a lot of our partners in town. With Northern Health Friendship Center would be, you know, they have outreach workers working there as well. You know, BC Ambulance as well. I think there was, when I first arrived here, there was an addictions. Is it still running? Okay. And maybe working with that group and piggyback off something that already exists. You know, I haven't had any correspondence with him, but it might be just with Staff Sergeant Healing being off. He may have been getting those emails and I haven't, or I don't know, but that's something I can definitely reach into to try to.
Do you see the working group as more than just addictions though, right? Were you thinking about like a working group for policing services in the NRM? Or were you speaking specifically towards addictions?
I was speaking specifically towards addictions, but I want to kind of reaffirm that when we talk about addictions and we're talking about, you know, that clientele, it's naturally going to overlap into policing areas that, you know, we talk about especially property crime and how that relates to drug use and what we're seeing in, you know, talking about our prolific offenders, and it's all hand in hand. And the key, you know, that maybe is if we can get people prolific, especially our prolific offenders, away from addiction some way or another, we're going to see benefits across the board. We're not going to see that property crime. We're going to see hopefully reductions in other crimes, whether it's disturbances or whatever the case is. You know, there's a lot of variables depending on the drug they're using and circumstances, but I really do believe that we need to be prepared on if this is approved and goes through. You know, we want to be behind the 8 ball on that one. We want to keep ahead of it.
So I think like we sort of have like well, we call it something different, but a working group around our health care concerns, issues, lack of services in our community, and have had for several years. And I think one of the greatest benefits of that group are the relationships that we have forged. And so just here today, speaking with you, have learned a lot, but also have come up with ideas how the NRM can play a role in an issue that you have brought forward that you would never have thought of that because local government isn't your thing, right? But so I'm just wondering if there is any appetite to have like a working group formed around policing issues, and addictions, of course, being one of them, but there are other issues as well.
Yeah, that'd be great. And it may even be beneficial too, so as I said, bringing in, you know, other service providers.
For
in town
sure,
that they're
right? Yeah.
seeing. And you know, I use the Friendship Center as an example. They have people coming there with different issues that, you know, maybe we're not aware of, or they're a different perspective, and maybe we need to change an approach. So a working group specifically with us would be awesome.
Okay, so do we want as a council to make a motion to have staff look into how that group could be formed, what the process might be from our end? Would we be taking a leadership role in it? Like, I don't know, first heard, I guess we need to do some research before we do anything else.
So Sergeant Fletcher, where are you on this idea of forming the group now? Do you have an officer in mind, or?
It would be myself. I would sit at that table.
Okay. Well, then perhaps we could get you to confer with our CAO about that. I'll ask for a motion then. Councillor Gerwing, seconded by Councillor Penny. All those in favor? Carried. Good job. All right, if there's no more questions, see we're getting close to time for council meeting. So I will ask for a motion to adjourn the special regional council meeting. Moved by Councillor Andrews, seconded by Councillor Roper. All those in favor? Carried.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant Fletcher, for coming by.